in order to do that, what we need is we need to be introduced to these 7 dimensions. Now, some of you will be very familiar with these. What I want to do today is, for those of you that are familiar with them, is to give you a refresher in terms of the depth behind the definition. And for those of you who have not seen these 7 mindsets before, then the key thing here is for you to understand that these are the 7 dimensions that together create what the modern worker's mind is, what the modern practitioner's mind is, and what the modern leader's mind is all about. So we have 7 dimensions, 7 mindsets: digital native, the beginner's mind, networked mindset, authentic mindset, data mindfulness, prepared mindset, and the human-centered mindset. And the key thing here really is to try and really understand them as mindsets as opposed to principles. So we could easily look on the left-hand side of this slide and say, oh yeah, digital, I can get that. It's about technology, it's about simplification, it's about doing things faster, it's about analyzing, it's about automating. I get it. Those are things, that's tangible thing. But what does that mean inside the mind, so that, you know, we can start to support people thinking differently? And that's what this is all about. If we can get people to think differently, they will behave differently, they will act differently, they will be open to change, and we can accelerate transformation. So what I'm going to do today is I'm just going to take us through each one of these and then introduce you to a little technique for how we can start making those shifts in either the design or the delivery of transformation. So mindset number 1, the digital native mind. So when we are thinking like a digital native, what are some of the things that we want to be considering? What are some of the things that we want to be bringing to life? Now, there's a huge amount of depth behind the digital native mindset, but one of the key things that we should be looking to anchor the digital native mindset is really the younger generations. It's those younger generations that are born digital. So the first element of the digital native mindset is a little bit obvious, but it's still worth a reminder. It's about being natural around technology. So if we're in the design and delivery of change and transformation, we want to understand how we're designing experiences that are natural for the human. How do we use tech and data to create natural experiences, intuitive experiences for the user and the human? But then we start to go deeper to the digital native mindset. And this is where it really gets cool. Active activism. Now, I don't know about you, but I personally am Generation X. And the Generation X, we were activists, but we are really talked about as passive activists. So we're the kind of generation that will say, oh, you know what, I didn't like what so-and-so said, or, you know, we might say yes to something in the room, but when we're out of the room, we reflect on it. When we're at the water cooler moment, there might be something else that we're talking about. So there's a duality, there's a polarity in terms of our actions and what's going on inside of our brains. But when you're thinking about a digital native mindset, it's when you are actively active, it's an activism. And what that means is we're bringing values and purpose. So values are the basis of what we design and deliver. Values are the basis of the decisions that we make. And we are purpose driven in how we act. So we're values based and we are purpose driven. So the key thing when we're thinking about the digital native mindset in the design and the delivery of change and transformation, so that we can actually get to that point of accelerated success, is thinking about the technology and the data as intuitive, and thinking about active activism in terms of where are the values and where's the purpose in the design and the delivery. Because so much of what we're seeing now, when you think about younger generations coming in, when we're thinking about talent and recruitment, what we're recognizing in the workplace across all industry, public sector and private sector, is that the employee, the potential employee, is asking, what are your values? What purpose drives your product and your service? How does that manifest within your working environment and within the package that you're giving me? So it's really important for us to think about all the different dimensions of that values-based and purpose-driven. So mindset number 2 is what we call the beginner's mind. Now, we work with a lot of organizations that come to us and say, we want to adopt an agile way of working. We want to become agile as an organization. And they have got fantastic training in terms of, you know, Scrum Master, and they might even have organizational SAFe, which is, you know, the agile at scale methodology being trained at a manager and a leadership level. All of that stuff is happening, but that's training in terms of methodology. But there's so much more to it than that. So much more to it than that in terms of an agile mind. Really, it's better for us, we believe, to be thinking about a modern mind rather than an agile mind, because you can have a modern mindset when you are applying linear and more waterfall projects and programs. It doesn't necessarily have to be an agile project or program to have an agile mind. You can be really modern in anything that you do. So modern mindset. So this second mindset, the beginner's mindset, really broadens out what we mean by agile. And it's about being experimental. It's about recognizing that there is more than one right answer to any problem or opportunity. So when you think about having an idea and then creating a strategy or a plan to deliver and design that idea into a project or program, there's usually very little space between those 2 points. What we want to do with a beginner's mind is put more and more space within those 2 points so that we are able to create high volume experiments at low risk. So it's thinking about how many right answers are there to this problem or opportunity? How do we act upon those in an experimental way? Super, super important. And of course, micro shifts. So it's getting those micro shifts, because in business as usual, if we can bring experimental, the beginner's mind into the moments of our change and transformation, we're able to bridge the gap between business as usual and the future, instead of having two separate plays. So at work, in the organization, or in the system, we really want transformation to be part of business as usual. And the way that we can do that is by micro shifts in daily practice. Now you can see that Elon Musk has been a picture now. Whether you're into him or not is kind of irrelevant for today's conversation. But what I want to do is I want to introduce you to something that's incredibly important, which is a principle of physics called first principle thinking. And first principle thinking is something that is really connected into this beginner's mind. And what first principle thinking is all about is breaking things down to their fundamental foundational points. So if you think about SpaceX, when Elon Musk had the idea of wanting to expand humanity, wanting to enable humanity to go off planet, and created that moonshot of let's colonize colonize Mars, and to do that we have to get to the moon first. He knew that part of that would be getting rockets into space. And what he did was he looked with his engineers and his strategists to what NASA were doing, because they were the analogous alternative. And what he recognized was that if he was ever going to do it, he'd need so much money, because he'd need $80 billion to create a rocket. And he didn't have that money, even though he's one of the wealthiest people on earth. But he didn't have that to invest. So they couldn't do what NASA were doing. So they had to think about it differently. And as a physicist, in terms of his background, he asked his engineers and his strategists and his designers to apply first principles thinking to the problem. So what he did was he got them in a room and he asked them to break things down to the fundamentals. So rather than looking at all of that process and all of that complexity that NASA were trying to deal with, which made it so incredibly heavy in terms of time and investment, what he asked his team to do is to apply first principles thinking and take it down to its bare minimum. And they came up with about 5 key components that were required to build a rocket. And from those 5 bare bone components, that's when they started to experiment, and that's when they started to design. And they designed something that was 80% cheaper in financial cost to the NASA equivalent. So rather than analogous thinking, what they did was they took something, they broke it down using first principles thinking instead of analogous thinking, and they were able to design with a beginner's mind. So curiosity, multiple right answers, first principles thinking. That's the beginner's mind. That gives you agility. That gives you curiosity. That gives you the ability to respond when there's change, when others are going to react around change. So it's the difference between being responsive versus reactive.